Okay, welcome everyone. This is Michael Long from the Kaplan CFP staff faculty welcoming you to the Stress-Free Webinar. I may need to rethink that title. I'm not sure that CFP and stress-free in the same sentence is not an oxymoron. It very well may be. But I hope you're doing well. I hope your studies are coming along. A few more days of hard push and then you'll begin the process of winding down and focusing on rest and energy for your national exam day. But first up, I just want to congratulate you for being here at the finish line. For a lot of you, it's been the better part of a year that you've invested in this process, and you've come a long, long way. You know an awful lot. Some days here at the end, it may seem like you're not remembering things. But you will. It often takes the context of the national exam to reach deep into your memory to pull some things out. But that's where I want you to find your strength and your energy and your confidence. Trust the work that you've done along the way. So I just want to touch base on a few things today. I'm not going to keep you a long time, but I do want to share a few last minute type of things to take a look at and to think of as you approach your exam day. If you need some help and I can help you in any way, I've put my email address here on this first slide, so feel free to shoot me an email, and if I can't help you directly right away, I will get someone involved who can, that perhaps specializes in an area for you. So hopefully you have been communicating with me. I also want you to know that I have a lot of emails that came in over the holiday weekend. I was away for a couple of days. I just want you to know I have them, I'm working on them, and I will get to each and every one of the questions that many of you have posted over the last couple of days. But keep those coming, and I'll help you any way that I possibly can. So let me take a look at some things here, and as always, if you've been in sessions with me before, feel free to type in questions as we go along here. I'll open that up and take a look at the end of the session, or if you prefer just to communicate directly with me, like I said, send it to my personal email, and I'll get on it. Okay, so the first thing I want to cover is just what we're going to take a look at today, what some of the study priorities should be, that countdown days right before the exam, and how to deal with that and what to expect, what exam day is going to look like, the exam format. A lot of this you already know, but I think in a session like this, we need to repeat it for those that maybe haven't tapped into all this just yet. Types of multiple choice questions and how to tackle them or approach them. I have a list of frequently tested topics that by no means is exclusively what you're going to see on the exam, but there are things that tend to appear more often than not on the exam, and then a couple of things just touching on after the exam, and then open it up to your questions. So first, just touching on what we like to call the final stretch toolbox. And one is, I've put a URL address there at the top of this screen. This is a screen from the CFP.net website that you're probably very familiar with. But there's a nice list of exam resources here you can see on this screen. If you haven't looked at the exam formulas provided in the tax tables, I always like to just go in there and download them directly from the source. You've seen them all over the place in Kaplan's materials, but I just found it kind of as a source of confidence to go look at their handout. It's the same. But certainly if you haven't looked at these, you really need to at this point, so that you can recognize where things are located in both of those documents. Those documents are going to exist in a pop-open screen for you on the exam that you can access at any time, and it will look like it does in the hard copy PDF. It's just going to be a tab that you open. But it's really helpful if you've spent enough time in both of those documents to know just where you need to go in the document to find a particular formula or some type of tax piece that's listed in there. And in particular, the retirement stuff. There's a lot of retirement stuff provided now for the exam that used to not be. So just make sure you're familiar with that. And then there's some other things you might click into here at the cfp.net site, including some FAQs for exam-oriented questions. All right, I've talked long and hard over the months about the review books 1 to 6, and I trust that each of you have read those cover to cover by now. You may still be working on a couple of them, but keep pushing. I just think that's where the details are. A lot of the questions on the national exam are going to be easy to narrow from 4 answer choices down to 2 answer choices, but most of us felt it could be really difficult to go from 2 down to 1, and that's where these details are so important to help you eliminate one of the remaining 2 answer choices. So I hope you've read them at least once. I hope you're continuing to use them to look up information on questions that you have missed or even guessed on but guessed correctly. Go find that content and take a look and see if you can connect with why the correct answer shown on a practice quiz or exam was the best choice among those that were offered. Also continue to look at the application examples in the book. I happen to think that's a great exercise in and of itself, just to move through those books and just flip through the pages and stop on each of the application examples that you see, because those are little stories, those are little vignettes of information that illustrate the application of the academic content that you've just looked at. And most of the questions on the national exam will be presented in a financial planning scenario, little story, just like those example boxes are. So that's a good exercise. If you haven't worked all the way through that, particularly the analyze and apply questions, continue to do that. I think that's helpful. Analyze and apply both existing in the books themselves, but then also, as you know, there's a QBank of analyze and apply. What I'm referencing here are each of the questions embedded in the sections of the book, as well as the domain questions in the back of the book. I think those are very good and they're challenging. A lot of them are steps in the financial planning process type questions, of which you'll have numerous similar questions on the national exam. And if you have never visited the appendix sections in the back of those books, that can be a good resource as well. There are some good summary tables and examples and things that you might find helpful just as a supplement to your studies right now. I also hope that you're well into book 7, the case study book. There are a dozen case studies and I think maybe 35 item sets and a handful of mini cases, and they're all just great practice. It's pretty high level as far as the challenge of doing these, so you may have found that you didn't score quite as high on the case studies as you did in just regular QBank quizzes. And my point in asking you to do all 12 case studies and all 35 item sets is not that it takes that many to be comfortable with a case study or with an item set. The point is it just helps you practice some other skills as well, sharpening your instincts as far as the kind of information you need to go seek to answer the question, focusing on the objective or the goal that's being presented in a case or an item set. That's just great practice. And you'll use that over and over on the national exam, not just for the item sets and the most likely one case that you'll see on the exam, but you'll use those skills you're sharpening in that book in each and every multiple choice question that you'll face on the exam. So continue to plug along with that book. And then moving on to exam day. What we call mind over matter. This is some common sense stuff, but make sure you know exactly how to get to your testing site. You'll find in some communities the landscape has changed and you don't recognize things, if it's been a while since you've been in that particular part of town. Also, be aware of any kind of construction that might be going on that could add time to your commute to the exam site. A lot of you will be testing at universities, so make sure that you know which building you're going to on campus. I like to think that exam day begins the night before. In that you're just starting to be really focused and thinking about the day ahead. But I wouldn't change my routine. I wouldn't change my nighttime routine, and I definitely wouldn't change my morning routine. Keep things as they are so your body reacts the same way. I absolutely would not stay up into the wee hours of the morning studying. By that time, by the night before, we kind of either know it or we don't, right? So there's really nothing to be gained as far as probability of passing the exam by working way into the early morning hours. I would go to bed the same time you normally do, and then keep your morning routine as well. For example, if you're not a coffee drinker, I wouldn't start on exam day because you just never know how your body might react, and you don't need to be dealing with that. There'll be enough pressure and stress when you get to the exam. And you're probably aware of this too. You're going to need a government-issued photo ID. I would have a calculator strategy, whether you bring more than one calculator or perhaps another set of batteries for your existing calculator, or just change the batteries now. Then you know that they're fresh. I've mentioned this before in other sessions, but make sure you know how to reset your calculator, particularly for the periods per year. And all along we've been teaching and coaching to set it at one period per year and leave it alone. One of the common mistakes that folks make are they change it to 12 periods per year for one problem or 4 periods per year, and inevitably forget to change it back to 1, so they don't match up on an answer that really would require one period per year. But just know how to do that, because they will require that the memory in the calculator be erased at check-in. So if they were to take the batteries out of the calculator, that's going to reset everything back to default. So you'll want to know about the 1 period per year, the beginning and end mode toggling, which I'm sure you're capable of, and then the decimal places. Most of us run it at 4 decimal places, and so you may need to deal with those at check-in both times when you check back in for the second session as well. Best source for that really is the calculator book. In the front of the calculator book, it has all of that for all the different kinds of calculators you're using. Most folks are using the 10B2, some use the 12C, few Texas Instruments. Well, those settings are in that book if you need some help with that. Most folks will take a light lunch or at least a snack for between sessions, and I would highly recommend that, something to keep your energy up, and then of course to stay hydrated for your second session. You cannot take food and drink into the testing room, so you need to dispose of those. You also cannot take any kind of notes into the exam room, and that makes sense. And that's the way it's been with other exams you've taken as well. Most of the Prometric exam sites supply small dry erase boards as your notepad to make some notes or do some quick calculations or something. I understand there are a few of the centers around the country that still use some scratch paper. They provide it. You cannot bring your own blank paper in. They will give you some paper. If that's a real critical need-to-know thing for you, I would call the test center that you're registered with and ask them, are they using dry erase boards or will they be supplying paper, if that's a critical answer. There are no scheduled breaks within a session, within the 3-hour sessions. You'll have a 40-minute break between sessions, but within the session it's not scheduled. Of course, you would be able to use the restroom, or for medical purposes if you need to take a med or something, you could go do that. However, the clock keeps running. So try to take care of all those things before you push go on your particular session. This one is really much easier said than done, but under the context of limiting mind games, I really encourage you to stay out of heavy content related discussions with other candidates. There is a great temptation to do that between sessions or even before the exam, and I just would avoid it. There's a very good chance that you know more than that other candidate. But if they very adamantly express what the correct answer was on a question that they just saw in the first session, and you answered it differently, you might start to doubt yourself, when indeed you very well may have been correct with your answer choice. So I just kind of went to the corners and stayed away from folks, and I would encourage you to do the same thing. Don't obsess about time on the exam. You do need to keep moving. And roughly, if you think about 85 questions in a session, over 180 minutes of time, you have a couple minutes to work on a question. My hope is that at this stage of the process, you've got some pretty good internal instincts and alarms set up. You know when you're obsessing and spending far too much time on a problem that you may need to pick your best choice and move on. Maybe mark it to review later, but don't stick on something beyond that couple of minutes. That's most likely to happen if it does on a calculation where you're just not matching any one of the four choices, so you just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. Give it your best shot, mark it, and move on, but you don't need to constantly be watching the clock. The clock will be on your screen, so you'll know at all times, but it's just, I wouldn't try to just think, okay, was that 2 minutes or is that 60 seconds? Just read the question thoroughly, evaluate your answer choices, pick the best, and move on. All right, so the exam itself, you're hopefully aware of this. You're going to answer a total of 170 questions. It'll be broken down into 85 in each session. You'll have 3 hours with a break in between. Each session is 3 hours. Understand the 40-minute clock starts as you submit your first session, or if time expires, if that comes first before you've gotten to the 85th question. So the reason I mention that is, don't wait when you're coming back in for session 2. Don't wait to the 40th minute, because there's probably going to be a line at the check-in, because it's going to be the same process as the first session. So go do what you need to do, and then get checked back in. On the exam, you'll see all the kinds of questions you've been practicing with. You will have the majority of the questions are going to be standalone, self-supporting, multiple choice questions. You will see some item sets, and you will see a handful of mini cases, which can sometimes be hard to distinguish from the item sets. And since the exam has gone computer-based, there has been one full case study. It may happen in your first session. It may happen in the second session, but just do it as it appears and get on with it. A lot of students come back from the exam and they tell us that they thought the case studies they practiced with in book 7 at Kaplan were actually more difficult than the case study that they had to do on the national exam. I think that's good news. It also is most likely going to be shorter than the case studies you worked in book 7. To date, the longest case study that I've heard of has been 15 questions, and as you well know now, a lot of the case studies in Book 7 run as many as 25 questions. So I think that's good news as well. And then the item sets and the mini case study, of course, they have an abbreviated narrative and fact set and maybe 3 or 4 related questions. Now, for the case study, you want to have a plan going into that. Of course, the case facts and narrative will also be presented electronically. It's not a separate PDF handout. And you have your choice. You could open up the case facts and narrative, read it comprehensively and in detail, maybe even using the highlighter tool that's available for the platform, and then open up the questions and get into it. One consistent piece of feedback students have told me after the exam is if they were to do it over again, they would go straight into the questions and not try to do a real deep read of the case facts first. Because what happens once you've clicked into the question, the questions, the screen splits and the case facts appear on one side of the screen and the questions appear on the other side of the screen. So you're able to scroll through the case facts on the side of the screen while you still are working through the questions. And a lot of students have told me had they known that, they would have just gone straight into the questions. It's up to you. You have time to do both, so certainly do what is most comfortable for you. But I want you to be aware that you are going to keep those case facts open on the side of the screen once you've clicked into the questions. So a lot of students will start working on the questions and then they'll scroll quickly through the case facts on the other side to find the area of information they need to answer that particular question. You also may find, and this has always been the case with the case study questions, you may find one or two that you can answer immediately without even referencing the case facts because it's not tied directly to some unique piece of information that was in the case facts. I always consider that a time-saving bonus if you can answer one without having to go back through the case facts. So think about what would be most comfortable for you in tackling your case study. You're going to see, again, you've practiced on hundreds and hundreds of these, but you're going to have both kinds of multiple choice questions, both as standalone and self-supporting, as I said, and then also through the item sets and case study. The A type is the most common that we're familiar with. We just have a question stem or narrative, and then we have A, B, C, D, 4 answer choices. All of the questions on the exam will have 4 answer choices, A through D. So you've seen hundreds and hundreds of those. You've also seen a lot of K-type questions, which is a narrative and a fact set followed by some statements. And the most typical format is to have 4 statements. And then the answer choices, of course, have you seen, are combinations of those statements. So make sure you've practiced with those. I like to use what I call as a knockout technique. And this is something that definitely helps to have some practice. But that's just simply, of course, when you look at the 4 statements and you know that statement 1 is absolutely correct, then you immediately know down below in the 4 answer choices that it has to include that one. So I can immediately knock out any answer choice that doesn't include that absolutely correct statement. And the opposite is true as well. If you're reading down through those quickly and you see that is absolutely wrong, then of course I know that I can't consider any of the answer choices that contain that because I know it's wrong. So hopefully that happens for you, where you just are absolutely certain of at least one of the statements, and you can narrow. Sometimes you can knock out a couple of the answer choice combinations at the bottom with that technique. In the best of situations, probably wouldn't happen a lot, but maybe it knocks out 3 of the 4 and you're on your way. You know which one's correct. But as you see those K-types, see if that works for you. See if you can practice some knockout technique. And of course, the biggest benefit of that is not only confidence, but time saving as well. You've heard me talk before as well about a lot of students like to read the last line of a question stem first and then seek information they need to answer. And that helps some students just filter some of the noise, some of the distracting information that can be found in a question stem. Sometimes it's really helpful, sometimes it isn't. But I always do it that way simply because I'm hoping that it will at least help me focus on what's actually being tested here. Is this a technical aspect? Is it a process aspect? What's going on? And then I'll seek the information in the question stem that pertains directly to that. Sometimes it's not too revealing, but I, for one, use that process all the time. Don't make assumptions. We've talked a lot about that, and if you've interacted with some of the subject matter specialists, they may have said, well, you're making an assumption here that you shouldn't do. The information needed is there in the case facts or in the question stem and narrative. So don't assume they're talking about this unless it's evident in the question stem. And remember that some of the questions are going to be testing the financial planning process, or that's the context for the question. Because sometimes with this exam, you'll read the thing and you'll look at the answer choices and think, wow, there's 2 absolutely correct statements in these choices, in my 4 answer choices. That often is an indication that there's some financial planning process context going on, and they may be looking for what's the next piece that the planner does. 2 of those 4 are academically correct, technically correct, but one of them is the next piece. So if you find yourself struggling that, wow, these have multiple correct answers, do a quick check just to think, wow, is this really linked more tightly to the process rather than the individual technical piece of it. So just beware if you're struggling like that. Oh, wow, is this more about what step I'm at? And you'll have some that are just straight up about the process, particularly related to the practice standards contained in the standards of professional conduct. The practice standards are linked directly to each of the steps in the financial planning process. And a while back I was telling you, be very cognizant of how CFP board sees the steps. What do they say happens in the establishing and defining the relationship, step number 1? What do they say happens in the gathering of information? Because that's the perspective we need to have in looking at those process-based questions. You may also find that some of these questions will be conceptual in nature rather than just, say, doing the math. So we have to understand what the purpose of some of these calculations is, what's the conceptual nature of it. And a good example that's been on the exam is from your investment formula page. And it has to do with the constant growth dividend model. And that's one of the easiest formulas on that page, isn't it? The main thing we have to remember is to advance that dividend out one period, but that's about the only mistake anyone ever makes on that one. but that one has been tested conceptually. And the question goes something along the lines of, for the constant growth dividend model, what type of company is best suited to use that particular valuation model? And so what it's looking for is that since we're using a constant growth figure, then that's best suited for a company that is most likely mature and with a long history of dividends. A startup, who knows how constant that dividend would be. So the answer we would be looking for on that one is mature and dividend history, something along those lines. So as you make your final passes through the material, and particularly those formulas, just because they've shown, they may test it that way before, just stop and think about, okay, conceptually, what does this do? Why would we use this other than just the numbers it creates, a formula? What is our purpose? What are we trying to accomplish in doing this particular calculation? But that's one for sure that I know is in their question pool. Numerous folks have come out and said, yeah, there was this, and you had to say what kind of company would be best for that. All right, you will have questions where you're just uncertain, so know that's going to happen, and hopefully that will help squelch any panic that might ensue. And that you're more likely to feel that if you have a stretch of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 that you're just like, wow, I'm not certain. Just know it's coming. You're going to have sections on the exam where you can't miss. It's like every one of them is a home run, and you're getting them right. But then you will also encounter some sections where you're just not so sure. Just roll with it. Read the full question. We've said that over and over. Yeah, the RTFQ. Read the full question. Evaluate those answer choices, mark it, and move on. And as I said, you could mark something to come back. Be selective in that process. Don't mark 9 out of 10 to come back and double check, because if you do that, you may run out of time before you could get to the ones that you really, really wanted to review, really needed to review. So just keep moving, but don't rush. Stay very busy with it, but don't hurry yourself to the point where you make silly mistakes. Hopefully those are all out of your system. You've already made them in working all of these practice questions and case studies where you didn't read carefully enough. That's one of the big purposes of doing all those questions, is to identify any inclinations that might hurt you on the exam, like reading too quickly or making assumptions. Now, when you go back and review, I like to say use the NFL replay rule before you start changing answers, and that is simply, unless you don't find irrefutable evidence that you missed something, I wouldn't change it. We've heard that forever, right? That our first instinct is usually the correct one. Just be real careful. A lot of folks that come back after the exam who have passed will say they changed a handful, if any at all. So be careful and make sure you have some evidence to overturn your initial selection. All right. I want to go through here some topics that, as I mentioned at the top of the session, tend to make their way into the exam more often than not. So I think these merit one more pass through the material. But remember, all of the topics, there's a list of 72 topics. Every one of them's fair game for the exam. So don't think that this list is all you're going to see. You've heard me talk before about being a big advocate for handwritten flashcards, not the retail stuff with a question on the front and an answer on the back. Things we write out, key points. My goal at this point would be to take that list of 72 and say, do I have at least one point I could tell you about that? I mean, just imagine I'm sitting in your office and we're rolling through those 72 topics, and the goal is just, give me one or two things for each of them. What's the biggest picture application for each of those? And if you can't come up with anything, that's a good short list to start to get back in and find that information and to see if you could add something to the list. I looked at those cards, and I think in one of the sessions I might have even shared with you one I had written a while back on, I think it was traditional defined benefit pension plan, and there was something like 12 or 15 bullet points, just 2-3 words that help trigger memory. And I always looked at that as that's 12 questions about a defined benefit pension plan I could answer. So it became like, bring it on. I've got 12 things here I could tell you about. Now, you're never going to see 12 questions on traditional defined benefit pension plans on the exam, but my attitude is I could answer that many. So think about that in your final days of review. Look down through those topics and just think, gosh, could I give you 1 or 2 points about that? Because quite often, folks, it's going to get you the points on the exam. And at a minimum, what you're reaching for is just the most basic application. If you can only remember one thing about a topic, make it the most basic application. Chances are you'll get that one right. Now, this is a screen grab I did, and I may have showed you this before as well in another session, but every few years, and the last one was 2015, CFP Board does a job task analysis, and they work closely with a lot of practicing CFPs about the nature of their practice and the things they're working with. And from that most recent round, they were talking about 5 areas. Now, none of these are new, but I listened to their webinar that they did on this and thought, well, you know what? If it's making their webinar after their job task analysis, I think you're going to see renewed interest in these topics on the national exam, and that seems to be the case based on feedback. So again, this isn't exclusive. Don't just go spend your remaining days on these 5 areas, but I think it merits some additional attention. The holistic and integrated financial planning is really working through those standards and understanding that one area of a plan impacts another, and working through a topic as it relates in the financial planning process. That's all that is, and you've been doing that throughout your studies. Same with retirement topics. You've got extensive work with that, and healthcare and education planning and debt management. Give them one more look. I also took note after this job task analysis, CFP Board, if you look at the breakdown of the exam and the percentage of questions, education has its own tab, so to speak. That's contained in the general principles material, what would be book 1, but in the breakdown of the exam, they show it separately. So to me, that just said, hey, this is becoming more important to them to give it its own category and question percentage. So again, just be mindful as you get into those areas that these have been on their radar recently. All right, so general principles, a short list of revisit. As I just mentioned, education plans, both the funding part, chances are you'll do at least one education funding calculation, and I just hope it's a single child. It gets a little more difficult when it's multiple children, but I'm hoping you're prepared for that as well. And multiple children is where it seems to be advantageous to know the uneven cash flows method. If it's just one child, it really doesn't matter whether you use uneven cash flows or the account balance method, things you've seen. But it could be either way. They're 1 or 2 children. Personal financial statements, we've talked a lot about the statement of financial position and the statement of cash flows. There's usually some work on the exam you do with one or both of those. The most logical place, of course, would be a case study. But again, that's another good example of something that could be tested conceptually. Like, what's the purpose? How is it used? What's the effect of a change to an item on a statement? What does it do essentially to the bottom line? Mentioned the steps in the financial planning process and an awareness that a question might be about that. Quite often those questions are linked then to the standards of professional conduct, the practice standards. Those are just so important, and in maybe the first session we had together, I mentioned that if I were sitting for the national exam these days, I would read the standards of professional conduct once a week minimum. So you may not have read them once a week, but I hope you have read them more than once and you understand the different sections and their purpose, including the last and most boring material in their booklet, and that's the Articles of Discipline. In recent cycles, they seem to have tested that more than they used to. Used to be, there was like one question, and it was, what are the 4 forms of discipline? And now they seem to also have some procedural type questions related to like appeal or candidate fitness standards. So just give it another good read, and so you're ready for questions from any one of those sections I had mentioned to you, including the terminology in maybe High Five or in one of the other sessions. One of the questions that always seems to be on there straight out of terminology is whether a planner can hold out as a fee-based, fee-only planner, or if they are fee plus commission. So understand how they define that stuff, because it may be a little different than how you and I might define it. And if you can't decide, if you have that question, they're asking you to identify, my note has always been, my default has always been, if I can't decide, I'm picking fee plus commission, because of the way they define commissions in their terminology. So that's a good use of some time right now, is to give that another good read. You're going to use time value of money throughout the exam. You won't have anything as basic as, what's the future, if somebody deposits $100 a month for 5 years at 4% interest, what does it total in 5 years? It won't be that, but you'll use those basics in other kinds of calculations like retirement planning, funding, or education funding. So be as comfortable as you can with your calculator. The most likely more challenging calculation, of course, would be education planning. There often has been a calculation of internal rate of return or net present value, which uses the same keystrokes as uneven cash flows. But that question usually revolves around purchasing a piece of machinery. And so they give you all the pertinent variables, and then the question is, would you recommend this? So we're looking for, if it's a net present value calculation, of course, we want something greater than 0 as the result. And if it's an internal rate of return, we're looking for a result that is greater than, equal to or greater than the required rate of return, which they will have needed to have given you in the narrative, if it's that kind of question. Mortgages, you might need to do one of those. I think it's helpful to know the amortization schedule piece in case you run into something like how much interest do they pay in the 3rd year of their mortgage. Again, if you're not familiar with that, give it a look in the calculator book and see how you feel about it. I don't know that I would stop at this time and spend the next 4 days just in the calculator book. I would try to determine what some weaknesses might be and focus on those, but I wouldn't just go at this point cover to cover in the calculator book. Insurance and employee benefits, book 2 for us. There's usually a question or two related to ISOs. That used to be one of them where when the exam was 285 questions, it wasn't uncommon to have 6 or 8 on ISOs, so it went much deeper than what it does today in just having 1 or 2 questions. Particularly ISOs, I think, and the fact that at exercise there's that positive adjustment for AMT. That's a really good exam focus for a question in an ISO. Life insurance, life insurance is one of those you sometimes come out of the exam and think, wow, they tested the heck out of life insurance. And it just happens to be one of those topics where there's so many ways to come at it that it can feel like they really tested the heck out of it. And what I mean by that is there's plenty of just straight up insurance knowledge. How do these things work? What are their features and benefits? But it's a topic that also has an income tax element. It has an estate tax element. So you may have seen the life insurance question that really got tagged in the exam as income tax, but it just makes you feel like, wow, there was just so much from that particular subject. Annuities, again, the tax treatment there is usually the angle on annuities. Disability is another one that can feel heavy because of the fact they can test us on the academic side of it, or they could test us on the tax. There often has been a question where the client has multiple types of disability insurance, privately owned, personally paid for, but also employer provided. And in that question, the employer could be paying for it all, or it could be some kind of cost-sharing arrangement where the employer is paying a portion and the employee is. And the question is, how much taxable benefits will they have for the balance of the year, something to that effect. So you've got to know the breakdown there. Long-term care insurance, again, can have an academic element and a taxation element. Particularly give a quick look again to the things that make up tax qualified long-term care insurance, some of the gotta have features. That's been a question before. And I know there's also a question in the question pool for the exam about partnership long-term care. Now because all states don't have this and the features can vary state to state, it won't be that type of testing. It'll be big picture, like what's the benefit of having a partnership long-term care insurance policy? And the benefit simply is that one can protect more of their personal assets than in a Medicaid spend down scenario than they would otherwise, because they're not able to keep many assets if ultimately they're headed to Medicaid. But if they've had partnership long-term care, then they're able to shield more of their own assets equal to the maximum benefits of the policy. So that question's been out there. Homeowners insurance, the most common testing angle that shows up seems to be that co-insurance requirement, where we're given the replacement value and the requirement is they have to maintain at least 80% of that replacement value as coverage in the policy, and if they don't, then a partial loss wouldn't be fully covered. That seems to show up a lot. You might you don't have to memorize all those different plans from HO2 on out, but understand big picture, how the benefits improve as you move from one to other. If you go from HO2 to 3, what gets improved? And there's also been a question of making HO3 essentially have the same benefits as a 5, and you can do that through an endorsement. I think it's an HO15 endorsement, so that you get replacement value on contents. That's been a question on the exam. COBRA tends to be driven more by triggers, what triggers COBRA, and then if you can layer in some of those durations, how long would those benefits last? That's an added bonus. HSAs, health savings accounts, those have been tested, and one thing in particular has been testing of the last month rule. And that is if the person is eligible for, has the high deductible plan, eligible for HSA at least by the last month of the year. And in exam land, that's going to be December. Then they will have been covered for the entire year from a funding standpoint. Because the question is, how much could they put in? And so we kind of instinctively think, well, 1 month, 1/12 of the maximum, but that's not the case. They could put in the full allotment, the maximum, if they're eligible by December. So don't get caught up on that one and try to divide it by 12. Investments, the alphabet soup on bonds, you might calculate, you'll probably calculate more than one of those. As far as a current yield or taxable equivalent yield, things like that. Also with bonds, you're likely to have a question where rates are going up or down, and you calculate the impact that has on the current value, market value of the bond. So give that stuff another look in book 3. Sharp, Jensen, and Trainer, sometimes you see all 3 of them on the exam, sometimes maybe just one. And if you've been with me for High 5, I go through that investment formula page with some tips and tricks and things for each of those. And you might remember that in picking between Sharp and Trainer, because there's a question in the pool where you have to do that, and how that comes down to looking at R2 and how high R2 is to determine whether the beta function the beta number we would use in Trainer would be reliable. But I also said in that session that if you can't decide, if it's that question you can't decide, my default is always, when in doubt, be Sharp, because Sharp's using standard deviation total risk. So I think you'll see one or all 3 of those. Standard deviation of a 2-asset portfolio used to always be in there. Years ago, it wasn't uncommon to have more than one of those. It's a long calculation. It's not a complex calculation if you look at it, and if you practice it, just dropping in the numbers. But I hear now it's been showing up again with at least one question. So I would just see how you feel about doing that one. And give it an attempt. Don't just skip it. Don't just mark C and move on that one. Give it a shot. Talked about the coefficient of determination and the correlation coefficient. Sometimes in the question where you're picking between Sharp and Trainer, they're not going to give you R2. You're going to have to know that you need to square that correlation coefficient to get there, and then make your judgment on Sharp or Trainer. And again, you'll do from this list, you're going to do multiples. It just you may not do every single one of these. So holding period return has been one that shows up more often than not. Efficient market hypothesis. For that, and I think I got into this in High 5. Those questions are more about what's already included, what is assumed to be included in today's price if you're a believer of those 3 forms, weak, semi-strong, and strong. What are they already assume is included in today's price? That's how that has tended to be tested. And then also along those lines, the efficient frontier, there's a question in the pool that just gives you a graph with plots on it. And the efficient frontier is there. And the question is what's attainable, or maybe what's not attainable, which of the letters are more efficient. So we're looking for things on the efficient frontier line. So give that information. There's good information in the book, and I'm pretty sure I did cover that in High 5. you may run into some suitability, and here again, you want to focus on what is the objective, what's the goal, and what's the timeline associated. These won't be super complex suitability questions, but you do have to pay attention to the goal and the timeline. And in saying that, that's something to come back around on in any question with which you're struggling. Am I locked on to the goal, to the objective that's being presented here? And by revisiting that, does it then put any clarity to the 4 answer choices? And that is particularly helpful if you find yourself in one of those, what does the planner do next, or in what order should the following assets be utilized or liquidated. You've got to make certain you're locked on to the goal that they're giving you in the question stem and the narrative. Also in High Five, I mentioned, in addition to being familiar with the formula page, and I gave you shortcuts for a bunch of those in High Five, but add to the list multi-stage dividend growth. And there's good examples in book 3 of that, just to create a kind of a time value of money calculation out of that. You won't have a problem where they change the dividend growth rate 5 times, but you might have one where they change it twice. So you want to know that's not one of the provided formulas. So you need to be comfortable with working through that one, because you very well may have, let's say, one multi-stage. Income tax, now this is one you look at, and I think what is it, like 12%, they say, of the questions. That 12% for me is always meant like 1040 testing, basic income tax fundamentals. It will feel like 12%, though, more than 12%, because some of the insurance things, questions that get tagged as insurance, will really be about the taxation of insurance. Income tax is one of those things that threads through all of the other topics or books, doesn't it? So just understand that it may feel like more than 12%. But on this short list, AMT, again, now they are providing more information about AMT than they used to. The testing does seem to still go along the lines of conceptually, just what's a 4? And what are the biggest triggers? And that's where ISOs come back into the picture. Because if you see in a question they're exercising a lot of ISOs, there could be a huge exposure to AMT. And then just try to grasp the bigger picture things. What goes away when for AMT? What's deductible for regular income taxes that isn't for AMT? And just start at the top of that list and see how deep you can go. I think if you get into that, it will be the more basic things. It's not going to be real remote things to try to remember. Same with kitty tax, you know, the big picture triggers of that. You may have to group some capital gains. They do give you the rates in the tax tables. Basis is big. And again, that's something that threads its way through multiple topics, but distinguishing the difference between how basis happens when property is acquired through a purchase, property acquired by gift, a property acquired by inheritance. You know, how is basis calculated in each of those scenarios? And often there's a question related to gift of loss property where we have to employ the dual basis rules. So I would give that a look. You may see hopefully not more than one question about passive activity losses, and so you want to know to apply the at-risk rules before the passive activity loss, or there has to be passive income to claim the passive loss. So give that one a look, and that one can become an easy question. Depreciation, now and then there's a 179 question. That's a number that's fairly dynamic, so that one may or may not show up. But depreciation, understand the bigger picture part of that is its effect on basis. And then you could see 1245 or 1250 recapture. Now, I've been intrigued that one of the things added to the tax tables 2 or maybe 2 cycles ago was they give us the tax rate on the 1250. And so I keep waiting to hear of a question that, oh yeah, there was 1250 and we had to know to look in the tax table for the rate. Up to that point, I've always felt that 1245 would be the more likely to show up. And so it just gets triggered when you start seeing that they're disposing of an asset and they're also giving you how much depreciation had been taken, and then the application is just that part of that gain is going to have to be ordinary gain because of that recapture. So I don't know if you'll see both, but I would guess that you'll see either 1245 or 1250. And related party transactions, particularly related to losses, and again, dual basis comes back into play. Retirement planning, a lot of the retirement planning stuff is suitability. Which plan would you pick for the given scenario? And here, once more, we have to be locked on to the goal. What's being laid out that the sponsor, the employer, wants to accomplish? What are the hot buttons for the plan, and then match it up with the appropriate benefits. And in Book 5, there's a good summary chart with all the plans and the different features. And you want to know the nuances, what separates one plan from the next, because that's what we want to align with the objectives we're being given. You may have a question regarding highly compensated employees and key employees, which ones are considered. There's a really good section on this in the live review binder. There's some good practice questions as it relates to highly compensated. And one little side note on this that tends to pop up in these questions is just remember that if one of the participants is a greater than 5% owner, they are always going to be in the highly compensated group, even if the employer uses the top 20% election for highly compensated. Because in that question, and there's a good one in live review material in the binder, if you see that question, you're inevitably going to think that, oh, well, this person isn't in the top 20% of compensation, so I'm taking them out, when in fact they're maybe a 6% owner. So they're still in. No way to get them out of that list. Eligibility investing, there's been an interesting question where you're told how many years of service the person has, but then they go on to say they've been a participant in the plan. And it has, standard eligibility requirements. Well, that can be testing the 21 and 1 rule, age 21 and 1 year of service. So if they've been in the plan 3 years, for vesting purposes, they would have 4 years of service, wouldn't they? So don't be tricked by that kind of question. There's usually one or more questions about rollovers, how to do it, and maybe the difference between I guess what we would call traditional rollover, where the client would take possession, versus a direct transfer, particularly as it relates to withholding. There usually is a question about NUA. It won't be super complex, but take a look at how that flows in the taxation when NUA's been elected. RMD is usually good for at least one question for qualified plan distributions. Social Security, there's a lot of ways to test Social Security. The most likely will be the retirement aspects of Social Security, and you might be asked to determine the optimal time for a client to claim Social Security, if they did it at 62, or if they did it at full retirement age, or if they did it at age 70, let's say. So we need to know reductions prior to full retirement age. We need to understand there are delayed credits if the person delays beyond full retirement age. And then there also could tax the impact of earned income. And we need to remember that that's only applicable up to full retirement age, and there's no earned income limits beyond that. We also might see something where it's about the taxation, not earned income, but taxation. And the biggest thing there that usually appears in the questions is we need to know to add back tax-exempt interest into that calculation. Usually we're not calculating exact numbers on that, but more the process and the impact of those items. And there has been a question in the pool over the years where the correct answer was 85%. You know, what's the top end? What's the most of one's Social Security that might be subject to taxation or be, you know, includable in income for taxation purposes? And it was not calculating. It was just the fact that the top end is 85%. Some of the non-qualified plans, you might see one on a SERP. You might see one that would involve using a rabbi trust to have that little security for a non-qualified deferred compensation plan. But again, that will often have a tax angle in the various non-qualified plans. Estate planning, this stuff's pretty straightforward. For a lot of us, this is the most challenging subject matter because we just don't work with it every day. But the testing of this for CFP purposes tends to stay fairly basic. And that's where, as you cruise through that list of topics for estate planning, you want to stop and say, gosh, could I give you a bullet point or two on each of these topics? There usually are questions related to what I call the alphabet soup of trusts. So give that another look and try to have a handle on what distinguishes one type of trust from another, because that's what we're going to come back around and link to the objective or the problem that's being outlined in the question narrative. When you look at those summary charts, it's an exercise of why would I pick this one over this one? What would the client be seeking for me to use this one over that one? So try to get pretty comfortable with that. And I should back up and say you almost always have a question on probate. And that question might involve a statement of financial position. So it would most likely would come in a case study where you could see titling. So pay close attention to titling on lists of assets if you see it's a probate type of question, and understand what goes through probate and what doesn't. Generation skipping transfer tax, I don't think you'll calculate that. Often the question for this is recognizing who a skip person is, that might trigger this. So take a look at that. Private annuities and family limited partnerships, understand the advantages of, and we would throw a scan into the game there as well. Again, why would I pick one over the other is usually what we're having to do. Gifting, you'll probably have multiple questions on involving gift tax. So so try to have a good handle on that, and when we can use the annual exclusion, and the impact of gift splitting is another good exam question, as well as direct payments to an educational institution or to a hospital. Let's say there has been question before, and we need to recognize, well, that's not a taxable gift when it's going directly, and we need to pull that out of a list of gifts that have been made in calculating taxable gifts for the year. Purpose of power of appointment, as well as power of appointment for healthcare, what kind of powers and what their function. Again, linking to what are they trying to accomplish here. And I already mentioned titling. Just understand how assets pass based on the different forms of ownership. Titling also can come into play back in the general principles if you see an FDIC question and understand we're focused on the titling of the accounts, and there's different FDIC for each of those forms of ownership, the joint property versus the fee simple property versus IRAs. That has been a good FDIC question in the past as well. So you do have some things that merit another look. You want to continue at this stage to review comprehensively as best you can, knowing that you're probably going to spend a little more time on some things you're not as comfortable with. But you've heard me say before, don't neglect your good stuff too, and use every minute of every day on the weaker things, because there are certain topics that we just individually absorb easier than others, maybe because of the type of work that we're involved with or specialty, but you want to be able to maximize your points on your good stuff. And you've heard me say before that, let's say, I don't know, let's say you work with taxes and you could probably walk into the exam and get 70% of the points possible from tax questions without really studying anything. But if you looked at the tax material as well, you might be able to drive your points to 100% or 90%, which could help lift you up if you stub your toe on insurance or something else. So don't completely neglect your better subjects at this point either. All right. If you're sitting in the exam and you're just positive that there's a bad question, you can submit challenges after the exam. You're going to have pretty good recall to describe the question and put forth why you feel it is erroneous. But within a couple weeks after the exam, you could do that. It is incredibly rare that a question would get tossed out. But understand, if you're just certain, you do have a way to submit those. And you can read about that too. As I said, at the CFP.net site, there's some good information on all that. You'll have a preliminary pass-fail when you submit your second session. It will give you. It is also incredibly rare that it changes from a well, I've never heard of it going from a preliminary pass to an official fail. I've heard of one time that there were some folks that went from a preliminary fail to a pass, but it is just incredibly rare that would happen. Don't worry about what the cut score is. We all want to know because we're wired that way, but they're never going to tell us. They are never going to tell us if 70% was pass or if it was 72 or 68. They're just never, ever going to say. In my heart, I've always believed it's probably in that range from the upper 60s to the mid 70s, but nobody knows because they just are real secretive about that kind of thing. The panel that puts together the exam each cycle, based on the questions selected, they come up with their cut score, and then if you're at or above that, it's a pass, and below that's a fail, and that's as much as we're ever really going to know about it. So don't get wrapped up in all of that. And I say that because it never has impacted how we approach studying for the CFP exam. Whether it's 68 or whether it's 73, that doesn't impact what I needed to do on a day-to-day basis to prepare for the exam. Because there's no way we would ever say, well, I hear it's 68, so I'll put in just enough effort to score 68%. Nobody does that. You make your full effort, and so don't get wrapped up in, is it 68 or is it 72? All right, and as I mentioned, stronger performance in an area could help pull you up. You'll get that on an official result, and then a few weeks later, it'll be officially announced through your CFP board account. If you don't pass, there's some real brief diagnostic that frankly isn't tremendously helpful. But let's just count on everybody passing, and we'll deal with what to do next if we don't make it later, okay? Okay, and then we'd love your feedback. We're always interested in how it went for you and what areas of your preparation seem to be most beneficial, because we're constantly looking to try to make things better. So we just treasure feedback after the fact. You'll probably get surveyed by Kaplan after the fact, and we just would really appreciate that you take a moment to work through those and you know, be candid about it on what you thought was really, really good and what you think could be improved. You're not going to hurt anybody's feelings by looking at the process and saying, well, wow, I think I could do this better. All right, I am going to take a look about in the questions that maybe you've posted along the way. Some of them I maybe have already answered just in the course as we move through here, but let me get to where I can see those on my side of things here and see what you posted for me today. Yeah, Jason, if you have formulas printed on the back of the calculator, they're going to want those covered up. So just do it ahead of time. And as I said, they're gonna clear the memory in there as well. So just cover it all up. Okay, there was a question about the base score, which I just covered. As far as practice exams and things, I mean, obviously, if you're down in the 30s and 40s on stuff, that should get your attention, and you should go work on that a lot. But when you're scoring in that same range, you know, mid to upper 60s and beyond, I always consider that to be within striking distance. There's no way to emulate the exam exactly through QBank quizzes and case studies and mock exams and diagnostic exams. It's impossible for any academic company to duplicate the exam, but it just gives you a feel for strength and weakness, and you're moving into that passing range. John, I see your question here about what type of questions would involve changing the periods per year from one. Mortgage questions, because the questions are always monthly, and so some students will change it to 12. If you're an expert with your calculator and there's no way you'll forget to go back to one period per year, fine. I just have found over the many years I've done this, that's kind of number one mistake as it involves time value of money, is they just have the thing set at a different payment periods per year. Yeah, Brittany, as far as a watch, I don't know if they have outside a countdown clock. I don't think so. So you would want to track your time of when you submitted and logged out, and maybe just on your phone, because you'll probably retrieve that, you know, when you leave the classroom after the first session. I would just be mindful and maybe put a you know, little alarm in there at 35 minutes or so. Good question, Greg, here about the case study. How does that work into the list, the total 170? It's just part of it. If you have in one session, if you have a case study that has 15 questions, that means you have 70 other multiple choice questions. It's not in addition to the to the 170. Julianne, let me read this. When it comes to gifts of appreciated property, do you find the board tends to prefer gifting prior to death to remove the asset from the estate, or waiting for step up? That's one of those, it depends on all the rest of the information and what are they driving at. Are they specifically talking about the goal of taxation on subsequent sale, then it may be more advantageous to get the step-up in basis. It's just one of those read the full question thing and see what the driver is, and then you can evaluate gifting it now or letting it pass by inheritance. Good question. Okay, there's a question here. Confirm that the questions in the book are worth reviewing. I thought someone had mentioned not to focus on those. With opportunity cost, I mean, that's where the trade-off begins. I advocate doing them all. So yes, I believe that the questions in the book are very worthwhile doing, particularly the domain questions in the back, because those get into the what does the planner do next type of questions that you're going to see some of on the exam. But I trading off doing that instead of the mock exam, nope, I wouldn't do that. Manage one's time to get through the ones in the book and the other ones. I hate to see people picking and choosing because there is an opportunity cost to that. Christopher, I see your question here about the slides. Yes, we will post the recording for this session and the slides online in the what would it be in? I guess the EPR webinars folder, I think is what it's called, and that'll probably be up hopefully by the end of the week. It usually takes a couple of days because there's something they do at the La Crosse office for formatting. But absolutely, you'll have the slides and the audio to go with it. This is a good question. Vinicius, a week away pounding questions or revisit the book. I would continue to pound questions, but I absolutely, on ones that I was clueless on, I would go find that material in the book. If I haven't read a book cover to cover, I would not scrap the book in favor of pounding more questions. I wouldn't do that. The book is where the details are purposely placed. But at a minimum, you want to go find supporting content for things you answered incorrectly or perhaps guessed correctly on. Okay. Yeah, Karen, same question about covering up the back of the calculator. I would just do that stuff ahead of time so you're not having to stand there. Yeah, it just raises the anxiety level if they're stopping you on the way in, having to do something. Kirsten, I see a question about a Mind Over Matter video. I don't know if that's still in that library or not, but it's along the same lines as I mentioned today about not getting into deep content, conversations, don't obsessing over time, that kind of thing. But I can check that out and see if that is somewhere intended to be posted. I don't know. Yeah, Zach, thanks for sharing this. Zach's telling us for the standard deviation of two asset, remember one of the instructors saying you can take the weighted average of the two and choose the answer that is the next one lower. I do like that shortcut, Zach. If it's a formula that you're just never going to be comfortable with and you would be more inclined to just mark C and move on, then I would absolutely use that shortcut, the weighted average of the two standard deviations. So you may have to calculate the weighting real quick between the two because they may just give you the values, but that's easy enough, right? And that is a good substitute if you're not comfortable with the formula. Question about what practice scores should we be shooting for, and again, there's no practice score I can tell you that will guarantee you're going to pass the exam. We're inclined to want to want to think that way, because that's how we did the securities exams and the insurance exam. We knew if we pounded questions and got the practice score to 75, 80%, we were guaranteed to pass the actual exam. And CFP just is so different from that, because it's not an academic exam, it's an application exam. But certainly, as I mentioned, if you're down in the 30s and 40s, you need to be hitting the academics real hard right now. But I think we start to move into striking distance when we get into those mid and upper 60s and beyond. I think we've got a good chance, without it being guaranteed, of course. Bob, question, if you're taking the test for a second time, would you follow the same study plan as you do the first? Yep, absolutely. I would do the exact same process to make sure you cover everything again. The number one mistake that folks make in a retake is they spend all of their time studying what they felt was weakest the first time around, and they typically do not pass the exam the second time, because what happens is the other scores go down. If we don't follow the comprehensive study plan a second time, the things that might have been scored medium in the beginning might drop to low or high to medium. So there's a great tendency, because it's so much work, to want to shortcut it and just study a few things the second time around, or just do more practice questions. We have to use a comprehensive approach every time we do it. The pass rate for second and third time takers and beyond is lower than it is for first time. But the reason for that is what I just described. We have a tendency the second time around to not study comprehensively. So don't be intimidated by that statistic about second timers being lower pass rate. Just follow the plan, and that's our best. And I should say, some of you in other sessions have heard me say before, the biggest commonality I see among my students after the exam that have passed, every one of them, with very, very few exceptions ever, followed the study planner to the letter and then some. That's the biggest thing that jumps out in debriefing with folks is, yep, did every single thing on that study planner and added this or that to it. So it does work if we do the work. Karen, yeah, I do believe you can start the second session before the end of the 40-minute break. I would recommend getting up, moving around, get some blood moving, maybe get a drink of water at least. But I believe you can, launch that second one. Brittany, I see your question here. Do you recommend waiting till the end to do the case study? I don't. I say do it whenever it appears. And the reason I say that is it's not as long as it used to be. I think there's plenty of time. But I always worry about people getting lost in the shuffle if they're jumping around in the questions. I would just rather do it 1 through 85 and leave it at that and not save it to the end. John, I see your question here. Do you think they test a lot of housing ratios? No, I don't. I think if you're doing ratios, it probably will be a housing ratio. And you want to remember those cutoffs. I think I might have touched on that in High Five as well. But if I didn't, it's in, what's it in? Book 1. And it's the 28% and what's the next one? 36%. That's a good exam question, but every one of those ratios you see, it's good to know stuff, but I think it's more likely to be housing related is what you'll see. Okay, Jean, hopefully I've answered your question about the practice scores in answering the previous ones. Ronak, how many questions a day? Again, that ought to be driven by the study planner, and do what the study planner has you do, and then you can add some, but just don't give up on everything else and do questions only. That is just not has not been a successful formula for the exam. But do as many as you can. But this brings up something this brings us something that's really worthwhile. Understand that right now you probably have some study fatigue. You've been doing this nights and weekends, and you're sitting down to practice often with a low energy level, and you're tired or frustrated that it just takes so much work. I think that costs us some points in the practice exam, so don't panic. If you're in that striking distance range, understand you're going to be more fresh on exam day, and hopefully you've experienced already the silly kinds of mistakes that we make, like making assumptions and hurrying and rushing and skipping things. You're going to be at your best on exam day. So don't beat yourself up day to day if your practice scores. I think you'll know when it really merits some more academic attention if they're super low. But if you were hoping to score 72 today and you get a 67, that's good. Don't beat yourself up. Keep going. Go look at the stuff you missed to see if there's a connection, but keep moving. Doug, on your question about kurtosis, I think well, I don't have any examples of testing on that just off the top of my head. What I would do with that, Doug, is send that through instructor link, and that will go to the author of that material, the content specialist, and I think he could help you more with that. I just don't have anything off the top of my head on the testing piece of that. Okay, yeah, David, what we were discussing was the shortcut for if you don't want to try to drop all the numbers into the standard deviation of a two-asset portfolio. A shortcut is to take the weighted average of the standard deviations and then pick the answer choice that's just below that, because it will get you pretty close. I'd rather you know how to do the calculation, but that's a good second best. Just take the weighted average of the standard deviations, look for the next lowest answer choice below that value. James, what I mean by an item set question is, and you have, I think, 35 of these in book 7. They start right after the case studies. An item set is a question format that you have an extended fact set then compared to a standalone multiple choice question. It may involve a table, a chart, or an extended narrative. But then from that, you use that extended fact set to answer 3, 4, 5 related questions to the same information. And there's 35 of those you can practice on in book 7. Okay, you're welcome, Gene. I appreciate the feedback. Yeah, Mary, there were some HP12C users where on the back it has some formulas, and you'll want to cover that. I would just tape that up, and make sure you can't see through it, because we can't take that kind of stuff into the information. But that's what they were asking. It was a couple of folks who used the 12C. Yeah, Brittany, what I would do is always try first through instructor link. We don't have like answer phone type of things set up that are just there to take inbound calls. Our primary content service is through instructor link. But go into detail of what you're struggling with, And if someone could get a hold of you about that, then that might be doable. But we really need to try to solve it through Instructor Link. Ryan, off the top of my head, I'm not recalling questions related to NOI. Doesn't mean they're not there, but I don't have an example for you on that one that I've heard of. Okay, good, Doug. Glad you were still on here, and when I answered to send that in, and I'll have Jim take a look at that. Yeah, Milton, practicing, when I refer to practice exams, I mean the QBank stuff, or the diagnostic exam, or the mock exam, which, by the way, if you take that mock exam and it's the lowest score you've received, don't beat yourself up. Again, like I've been saying, if you're down at 30%, there's a lot of work to be done, but it usually, because of the degree of difficulty, is one of the lower scores that you'll have for a practice. Certainly compared to your QBank quizzes, it'll probably be a little lower than your QBank. Brittany, I'd try to do both. If you haven't taken the diagnostic exam was designed to be taken at the very beginning of your studies, just to hopefully help you identify strength and potential weaker areas. But it's another good exercise to do those questions, and you can review them after the fact. It'll give you the score, but then you can look at the questions with full solution rationale. I think it's 100 questions now, but you just need to manage your time to fit that into your schedule alongside of your Analyze and Apply QBank quizzes that you're doing. But I'm glad to hear that other than that, you've followed the study planner very, very closely. That's good news. Good stuff you've posted here along the way today. I appreciate you hanging in there and your participation today. But as I said, if there's things I can help you directly with, please send them. I am working on a long list right now from over the holiday, but I should have that caught up by the end of the day today. But I will get to each and every question that you might submit, or refer you, like I did with the kurtosis piece, to one of the content specialists. Yeah, Vince, I would hope to see a 70 or so. Again, that mid to upper 60s and above for the diagnostic, I think that's a good sign. But just as important, Vince, is after the fact. The things you miss, to go back into the books and locate that material and try to connect with why was the correct answer shown the best one from those they offered me. That's as important as what the score is. It really is. Because by taking the time to review, instinctively what we want to do is load up another one and move on to the next quiz. But we're missing a huge opportunity to correct errors and to not repeat mistakes on the national exam by taking the time to review everything we answer incorrectly at this point. Yeah, question here, should we take the practice exam offered from CFP? You know, I know for a fact you have enough material to pass the exam without that, but a lot of students do purchase it from CFP board just as another practice session. So if you don't want to spend the money on that, feel confident in what you do have. I don't think buying the CFP board practice exam will make the difference of one passing or failing the exam. I don't believe that. You have plenty of material and good resources to pass with what you have with Kaplan. But I will say a lot of students do, just because they want to see everything they can possibly see. Gene, yeah, I think 25 at a time. At some point, though, you do want to do some longer sessions, if nothing else, just for endurance, and that's why the mock exam is so good. I advocate doing the mock exam all in the same day, just like you'll do the national exam. Do session 1 of the mock exam, take a 40-minute break, do session 2 of the mock exam, because that gives you a feel for the type of endurance you're going to have to sit there and answer 85 questions in a row. So while I like 25 questions, at some point do some longer ones. You don't want your first exposure to 85 straight questions or even 50 to be on exam day, because fatigue sets in and then you start to lose focus. So experience that now is better. But yeah, 25 at a time. You can work multiple sessions in throughout the day that way. Doug, I would, when you feel like you've comprehensively reviewed across 6 books and you've done plenty of practice questions and some case studies and things, I would work that mock exam in any time now. Because then if it exposes anything, if it exposes any tendencies you're having to rush and worry about time and making assumptions, you've got ample time to work on that. If you wait to the last minute to take the mock exam, one, there's a higher probability you just won't do it. You'll be too tired at that point. You go, I'm not going to take that 85, 170 question exam, and that would be a shame to not do it at all. So any day now, I would work that in and then see what it reveals for you that you might focus on in the remaining days. Gene, at this stage of the game, I think there's a higher benefit of doing analyze and apply questions over review and recall. Review and recall are more academic based. Its purpose was really to help you build an academic foundation. Whereas analyze and apply moves you more toward application of the topics as opposed to the pure academic. So if you must choose analyze and apply. There's not as many of them, but if you must choose, I would go there first. But also, you've heard me say this before in other sessions, never, never at the expense of not doing something on the study planner should you sit in the QBank. One of the most common things among those who don't pass the test, when I talk to them later, inevitably, it seems 9 out of 10 of them tell me, I just pounded questions. I didn't look at the books. I didn't do that other stuff because I passed all my securities exams by just doing hundreds of practice questions. That simply does not work for CFP. So never sit in the QBank at the expense of getting the reading done or at the expense of doing case studies. That's why the study planner breaks it up, because it will move you through all of the key resources and help limit the potential or probability of somebody, what we say, living in the QBank. All right. Anything else? Again, this can just be the beginning of conversation for us, so communicate with me after the fact. But is there anything else you want me to address here live today? Oh, Brittany, thank you for the encouraging feedback about High Five. I love those sessions and constantly working to try to improve them. So I'm glad that you've felt them to be very useful for you. Yeah, Doug, 1 week from now in the mock, that'll work. Still leaves you some time. Okay, hang in there, my friends. You totally can do this. Keep studying and then make sure those last couple of days before your day that you focus on rest and energy. Oh, thanks, Julianne. That's good feedback about High Five as well. Yay. Okay, well, we'll have a replay up in probably a couple of days if you need to refer back to anything. But in the meantime, stay in touch with me and let me know how it's going and how I can help you, okay? Study on, my friends. Talk to you soon. Bye now.